Okay, I know I'm dating myself with this question, but do you remember this commercial from the Burger Wars of the 1980s?
It certainly is a big bun.
It's a very big bun.
Big fluffy bun.
It's a very big fluffy bun.
Where's the beef?
Some hamburger places give you a lot less beef on a lot of bun.
Where's the beef?
At Wendy's, we serve a hamburger we modestly call a single. And Wendy's single has more beef than the Whopper or Big Mac. At Wendy's, you get more beef and less bun.
Hey, where's the beef?
Well, if you asked, where's the beef today, you might be told it's not on your burger, even though that iconic patty is shaped, flavored, and marketed to taste like the real thing. On this week's Between the Rows, I'll be joined by two food industry marketing consultants to discuss what that could mean for Canada's cattle industry. That's the long view. We're also talking to Brian Perriott of CanFax about what might be shaping cattle markets over the short term. I'm your host, Laura Rance, and we'll get started right after this word from our sponsor.
Part of being a farmer is being an accountant, and a mechanic, and a chemist. You have lots on the go. So FarmLink makes your grain marketing go further. We help you reach your financial goals with calculated sales decisions. No bias, just solutions and results. Plus, with our new app GrainFox, we bring every opportunity right to your fingertips. Literally. Start seeing the returns that'll get your family ahead. You've earned it. FarmLink. Your work is worth more. Get started at farmlinksolutions.ca.
Hey, it's Canada Day weekend. For me, anyway, this holiday has been about getting together with friends and throwing some burgers on the barbie ever since 2003, when the world's borders were closed to Canada's beef. Canadians rallied around this country's beef producers in a show of solidarity during that crisis. We couldn't possibly eat up all the surplus beef created, but it made sure that producers were aware that the rest of us stood behind the quality of beef they produce. Here we are, nearly 2 decades later, in the midst of a pandemic that really curtails any idea of social gatherings in many parts of the country. But Canada's beef industry is also facing a new threat. This time, it's competition from alternative proteins, whether it is meat made from cells, fermented fake meats, or plant-based proteins designed to look and taste like the real thing. Should cattle producers be worried? Maybe, maybe not. I'm joined today by two food industry marketing consultants to talk about the changing scene in the protein market. Joanne MacArthur is president of Nourish Food Marketing, and Len Kahn is president of Contact Marketing. Both have recently published articles aimed at adding some context to this growing debate. Here's our conversation. Joanne, just walk us through how complicated the decision to have a burger is these days.
Right. So it's interesting. We've gone through, I guess, over time, a real evolution in these plant-based alternatives. First, plant-based is a relatively new term, right? It used to be vegetarian, vegan, and those have been replaced by the concept of plant-based, which seems a little more friendly, a little more inclusive. And we've gone through a bunch of meat analogs, and a lot of the products we see today are trying to have that broader appeal, and they're defining themselves really by what they aren't. They're defining themselves as faux meat. If you think of Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger, that's where they are today. They've moved beyond just the pulses to try to emulate the taste and the texture of traditional meat to appeal to more of that flexitarian consumer. Because to put it into perspective, there's lots of buzz around this and there's huge growth rates, but we have to remember that, the plant-based protein market in Canada is only about 3%. So it's a really small base, but potentially at a tipping point.
So, what's driving the development of these alternatives?
The problem I think we're trying to solve is the recognition that we can't continue to eat the way we're eating and have our grandkids have the same quality of life that we do. I think we've hit a point where people are now eating rather than for, values. They don't want to see, animal slaughtered or whatever. It's moved over, especially with the younger generations who are driving a lot of this growth, Generation Z, millennials, young millennial parents. It's for them, it's more about planet health. And, some people boomers had in some cases gone to plant-based for heart health, but a lot of these, let's be honest, a lot of these meat alternatives are not the healthiest. They're more of an indulgence in a way. But I think it's that recognition that we need to lower our carbon footprint, frankly. And while there's ways to do that with different kinds of meat, grass-fed, etc., I don't think consumers yet have a real strong understanding of the fact that not all proteins are equal in that way.
I mean, it's very hard to get your complete protein needs out of a plant-based system. I mean, you have to work at that, whereas meat, it's there. And it's also interesting to me that a lot of the, you call them faux meats, but they're doing everything they can to make them taste like meat. So it's not like we're changing our dietary preferences so much as we're trying to, I guess, change the footprint. Is that what's happening?
Yes, but it's complicated. I kind of smile because there was this whole pendulum swing around processed food bad. And yet those same people who rejected processed food are now eating these faux meat products, which are highly processed. And if you look at the ingredient list, they've been cleaning up their ingredient list over the last few years. But I do think we're going to have, as people start getting introduced to these products, I think they're going to start looking at them maybe as more of an indulgence. I think, if you look at Canada, A&W really helped popularize Beyond Meat, the Beyond Meat burger. And how did they do that? They did that by, serving it up the same way as they did their standard Canadian beef product. It was an indulgence with the fries on the side and the soda on the side. I think there's going to be more of a discussion around the quality of protein, the digestibility of protein going forward once we get past this sort of plant-based curious phase, I guess.
Now, Len Con, you bring more of a producer's perspective to this discussion, but how is the beef industry responding to this? Do they feel threatened at this stage?
Well, Laura, as you know, farmers are incredibly independent, and within the environment or universe of farmers, beef farmers are the most independent. So I will not claim to speak for the whole industry. But what I can say in talking to some producers and industry leaders recently on this topic, quite frankly, they view this as a big nothing burger. They are not seeing huge effects at farm level. They realize that changes are afoot. I actually had an interesting conversation. I'll be curious to see if Joanne agrees with this or not. One of the people I talked to said, the plant-based folks, Impossible Burger and the others, are actually helping create demand. Because if you look at their marketing, the burgers, whatever, looks really attractive. They're not convinced that share is being taken. They're feeling to a certain degree that maybe this is actually increasing demand. So, beef farmers are extremely resilient. No group has been through more maybe than the beef farmers with BSE and trade issues and all the, health issues and environmental issues. So they have seen this and worse before. Most beef operations are integrated anyway, so they're not totally dependent on only beef. They grow crops and other things. And the industry position seems to be vegetables and meat protein, especially beef, go great on the plate and also on the farm, meaning, vegetables are served with meat, of course. And Joanne is very familiar with this. There are groups like mushrooms that are, blended products are a big thing. So overall, Laura, it's not panic time on the farm. They're watching with interest. The industry itself is evolving, but they don't think this is an existential threat by any means.
Joanne, do you think that are they right? I mean, is this helping to focus demand on beef burgers?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. If you look at history, people seem to think change is gradual, and it is up until a point, and then you hit an inflection point and you see that hockey stick. And I worry that we may be at a point soon with beef, and we need to really start looking at that. And if you look at what happened, for instance, in the milk category, and it was those plant-based milks were growing slowly, and now if you look at oat milk, which was basically nowhere 3 years ago, it's now number 2 in the milk category worldwide. So that happened quickly. And if I look at human behavior over this past year and a bit during COVID, there's been this whole societal reexamination of values. And we've seen, especially with the younger generations who are driving a lot of this change, things that we wouldn't have thought could have happened a year ago, we now take for granted. Trans rights, Black Lives Matter. And, if you're in rural Canada, this may not be on your radar, but if you're in where the big population groups are, there's been a fundamental change over the past year, and the rate of change that I have never seen. And I do wonder if we are at the same inflection point once we get through this pandemic. Are consumers going to refocus on planet health?
I mean, certainly there's a lot of, convergence on some of these issues. I mean, you look at the pandemic, you look at climate change. I mean, there are some similarities into the root causes of that. So if we become more focused on planet health, is there a clear understanding or a clear decision that plant-based is the way to go?
So I'll step on Joanne on that one. Since she disagreed with me, then I'm going to answer her question and say, the industry itself, like I said before, the beef industry is very adaptive, if that's the right word. So they are not sitting back and ignoring this trend. And I think Joanne's right. We may or may not be at an inflection point, but it's not going away. So the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, for example, is shining a bright light on the many benefits that beef production, especially on the prairie grasslands, and I won't go into all of it, but you can check it out online. It's quite compelling stuff. There are health benefits to beef. I remember about 20 years ago hearing a talk by Mark Tewksbury, the Olympic swimmer, and they had actually gone on a non-meat a vegetarian type diet and found that they lost performance and went back to beef. So I do wonder, and Joanne, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, but are we switching any hardcore beef eaters or people who enjoy beef over to plant-based, or are we bringing back some folks who may have got away from eating beef for any number of reasons, and here's an alternative to beef? So I'm not sure if we're at that inflection point, but I do know that the beef industry has been very adept at adapting to changes like this.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point about, Canadian beef is in a really great position versus other places in the world because with the grasslands, there's regenerative agriculture starting to hit consumers' radar, but there is no regenerative agriculture or soil health without animals. You need that whole system for it to work. So in Canada, we're in the enviable position there. I do think, there's a lot of discussion around, those very processed burgers. What is their actual ecological footprint as well. So there's discussions to be had there. But the whole analysis of carbon footprint eating for the climate, and I do think it's going to be more of a lessitarian rather than a, you're a vegan, you're a meat eater. I don't think it's an or. I think it can be an and. And Len mentioned the blended products, with mushrooms. I always talk about Bump, which is a client of ours out of Winnipeg, which takes the best of pea protein as well as beef and combines it. So you're able to do a half and half, a 30, 70. And so I think it's the best of both worlds.
We're seeing that fragmentation occur in the marketplace, but we're also seeing the chasm between meat eaters and non-meat eaters seems to be widening. I mean, going back to commercials that, we started this segment off with, but, we're seeing advertisements these days for an even bigger Big Mac versus campaigns to remove beef altogether from our recipes. For example, Epicurious just recently announced that they're not going to be carrying any recipes containing beef. Like, why has this become so polarized? And do you see that continuing? Len, did you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that question specifically, and the numbers aren't all in yet, but the sense I get is that beef consumption and appreciation for beef has actually gone up during COVID. And we've found over the years, there's research that supports this, that in times of stress and uncertainty, consumers gravitate towards brands and things that they know and trust. And I think the numbers are going to show, I believe, that beef consumption actually went up, and there may be a stickiness to that. At the end of the day, there is nothing currently that replaces a nice big steak. Or, that is interesting that McDonald's is going to more meat in their burger. So I think we have to wait and see. I think there's still a hardcore group of people that are going to stick to beef, and I'm one of these people. I have tried the other options, and frankly, they're quite good. They're fine. But at the end of the day, why would I eat ground up plant protein that's processed and flavored to taste like a burger when I can just buy a burger? So I probably didn't answer your question, but hopefully I'm in the zone anyway.
Joanne, you mentioned regenerative agriculture, and I guess I wondered, is that a potential bridge across that middle ground in this question of whether beef is good or bad?
Yeah, I think, if you look at the developed world, we don't have a protein issue. We actually, as a society, we get more protein than we need. So is it eating less but better? And to Len's point, during the pandemic, consumers actually traded up in terms of the cuts of meat that they were eating because they weren't eating out in a restaurant. We have seen those higher cuts of meat grow in terms of purchasing as consumers, want to treat themselves, and they can treat themselves more cost effectively by preparing it themselves at home. But as things open up, as there's maybe less of that kind of treating themselves and just trying to make ends meet again, and prices are going up, that could change.
We talk about regenerative and grass-fed beef. And one of the big arguments that you would hear against it is that it's more expensive for consumers. But I guess I wondered how that compares to the cost of plant-based or laboratory meats, and whether that just leads us to the question that, consumers are just going to get used to paying more to eat the kinds of foods that they want to eat.
Well, we probably should be paying more. I mean, food inflation is going to be probably 5% this year. And the input costs are going up. Workers' wages are going up. So I think that prices will be going up. And we know that, there's about, I think the number is about 16 to 18% of consumers eat plant-based, not by choice, but because of cost. On the other hand, you're seeing the CEO of Impossible Burger, they're going through record sales, and at the same time he's cutting his prices by 20%, and he has vowed to get his prices down below ground beef. And you were seeing lots of investor money going in there, not a lot of profit being made. You know, it's like that tech unicorn play. So yeah, I think you're seeing more of that as well. But I do think that maybe consumers will start eating a little bit less protein, just as a way of eat better, but eat less.
You know, Laura, at the beginning of COVID, I think the food system, especially consumers, got a jolt that has not been seen in a generation. And that was, for a short period of time, there were some shortages and there was some uncertainty about where food is going to come from, and a reliable source of food. And I've seen the same thing Joanne has. We have a local butcher that we've become friends with, and he has also said that people are maybe buying less but buying better. And so I think COVID is going to throw some curves at us that we haven't anticipated. So it'll be really interesting if we want to redo this in a year or two to see what actually has happened. But I do agree with Joanne. I think people may eat a little less beef or other meat proteins, but better cuts, better products.
Yeah, and I don't think I answered your question, sorry, Laura, on cell-based. And I don't think, my personal opinion is, for a country like Canada, where we have vast resources, I don't think cell-based ag makes sense. Like, Singapore, you look at the markets where government's putting money into it. It's more of a food security play, which we're blessed not to have to worry about. And I also have a little bit of skepticism that, lab-based meat will be embraced by consumers. They tend to turn their nose up at scientific developments like GMOs. So how is lab-based meat going to play there?
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining me for this. And we will repeat this line of questioning in a few months just to see where things are at. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure, as always.
Thanks, Laura.
That was Joanne MacArthur of Nourish Food Marketing and Len Kahn of Contact. Next up, Lisa Gunther, editor of Canadian Cattleman magazine, interviews Brian Peria of CanFax about the short-term outlook for the cattle markets.
Thanks for joining me today, Brian. Maybe if you could just give us a bit of a update on what's happening in the cattle markets to start.
Yeah, well, it's been not too bad here the last month or two. Prices generally for all animal types have been strengthening. Fed cattle prices we hit our annual highs in June, or the high so far this year, which isn't very seasonal, but demand's been good. Canadian prices, we've been enjoying, very large premiums to the U.S. Cows, fed cattle, feeder cattle, calves, everything at spots $15-20 above the U.S. market when you can compare in Canadian dollars. So cattle numbers a little tighter here, and demand has been good. Feedlots, making a little bit of money, not making a lot of money, but it's been months and months really with the feedlot sector not really showing much for profits. So a little bit more promising overall in the marketplace right now.
So one thing that's been kind of going on for a while, I guess, is feeder cattle imports are up, and we're seeing some feedlot expansion. So what's driving that, and what does that mean for cow-calf producers?
It's an interesting one right now. We continue to see we got a couple more feedlots coming on stream this year. I'm not sure it'll continue so much. We've just seen, I think, probably from our lows, about 15% expansion in the finishing capacity in Western Canada. We got to keep in mind in Canada here, we've added an extra packer, Harmony Beef, from 2-3 years ago or whatever it is since they've opened. Maybe some of the throughput at our big packers has increased slightly on a daily level. And, it's just created a stronger demand for fed cattle. And as I mentioned earlier, for the most part, Canadian prices have been near par or premium to the U.S. market. So we're basically attracting cattle to Canada. First of all, keeping more feeders and more processing cattle in Canada, and to your point, we've now started to import feeder cattle just because, as I said again, our prices are at a premium to the United States. And if you look real broadly, if you look at it, the U.S. industry has expanded significantly in the last 5 years, while Canada has shrunk. And I'm talking about the cow herds. So Canadian cow herds shrunk, but we're one of the few areas that have actually added packing capacity. And as the U.S. herd has grown, and their packing capacity hasn't really changed much, just natural market arbitrage is bringing more cattle up north to Canada to meet the demand here. And for the cow-calf sector, certainly, it's good when we've got, it just means strong demand for Canadian calves and feeder cattle. Our herd hasn't expanded. Maybe while we were showing signs of stabilization, maybe even a few less cows going to market, but that's maybe changing with the weather. But overall, as I said, it's supporting Canadian calf prices being, pretty much Western Canadian calf prices, some of the strongest prices in North America. And we should generally expect that to continue. Given how much, both feedlot and packing capacity we've added, that it keeps the demand solid for our cow-calf producers.
So when it comes to the cull-cow slaughter, we're seeing, I think it was an 11-year high in mid-June this year. So what's driving that demand?
Partly, that was a weekly high. You got to overall. We've seen a little bit of a counter seasonal increase in cow slaughter. That's partly weather related here. Dryness, guys are culling as quick as they can, trying to preserve their grass for their main mother herd. The other thing, as I said, our fed cattle prices being $15-20 above the U.S. market. They maybe will look and through most of last year, they were basically putting cows on the back burner to work through all the fed cattle supplies. And basically they've done all that and then some. So, they can also afford to pay up for these cows, keeping cows in Canada for processing just to fill hook space. And the other thing, we've seen some trade flows, continue. Argentina, for example, they stopped exporting beef, and that influenced some of the world trade flows. China's been importing a lot. Australia exports have been down. Just very good demand for beef in general, but also lean trim, and the packers are looking for that and willing to pay up for our cows as well. So it's both a supply and demand kind of scenario. As cow slaughter, technically, we're 5 or 7% above a year ago, but we're actually about 20% below 2019 if we look at year-to-date numbers. So it's not majorly drastic numbers at all on the cow slaughter side. They're up a little bit, but they're not large by any means. It's not historically large.
So I suppose the less positive news, of course, is that the new crop barley prices and new crop prices in general are just still quite high. So what do cow-calf producers and feedlot operators need to think about as we head towards the fall calf run with those prices?
Yeah, we've seemed to, we had record high barley prices, or we're pretty much at record high barley prices this summer, and these weather concerns continue to, influence the grain market and very strong Chinese demand. Certainly guys have their eye on the markets. A little bit of, feedlots booking forward pricing some barley at pretty lofty levels just to try and at least have some inventory around them for the fall run. Other guys maybe looking at the corn market or hedging opportunities there if need be. But for the cow-calf sector, there's so many different factors at play when we talk about, these premium prices to the U.S. The dollars, well, it's maybe settling around 80 cents, but it had been on quite a run. And then these grain prices can take a pretty big bite out of the calf market. It's kind of just going to be, a toss up between, is demand going to trump strong calf demand, going to trump sort of the higher dollar and higher feed costs. But, if we continue to have weather concerns and see these calves being sold and the grain market go up, it can pressure calves a lot. Just to keep in mind, our calf market, I guess I was fairly bullish on the calf market, or, there's still upside potential if these crop prices come down. But from what a feedlot sort of banks on, if barley was to drop $1 a bushel, you could add almost 20 cents per pound to the price of your calves come fall around. So, they're pricing in a pretty tight supply situation and higher prices. So, yeah, if we see some relief on these grain markets for whatever reason it is, that could certainly add a little bit of spunk to the market for calves. On the other hand, if drought kicks in and supplies get scary kind of tight, boy, that another buck a bushel would be quite a hit to the calf prices too. So, and it's hard to predict at this point, but it's certainly a factor we got to keep watching. I guess we're just definitely watching forage supplies. We're starting to see quite a few pairs come to town. We are starting to see some pressure from this weather influencing the markets. Yearlings moving early, as I said. Prices are still strong. So, guys have, if they're kind of hesitant or worrying about grass, they're like, well, they can move their feeders for a pretty decent price. So they're just doing that. But some of these pairs have been kind of disappointing. They've almost been trying to split off some of the pairs just because there hasn't been that much demand because guys don't have grass. And that certainly put some pressure on the pairs market. So we definitely are seeing the weather starting to creep into this marketplace right now. But and this heat, big heat, has a lot of guys nervous too. So hopefully we can get through this week, and if some showers come through, we'll have some relief. But in another month, or it could get a little bit more dicey for sure.
Well, that's all we have for you on this week's Between the Rows. Here's hoping you stay cool this Canada Day weekend and that you get to enjoy a good burger, no matter what it's made out of. Thanks for joining us. I'm Laura Rance.
Part of being a farmer is being an accountant, and a mechanic, and a chemist. You have lots on the go, so FarmLink makes your grain marketing go further. We help you reach your financial goals with calculated sales decisions. No bias, just solutions and results. Plus, with our new app GrainFox, we bring every opportunity right to your fingertips, literally. Start seeing the returns that'll get your family ahead. You've earned it. FarmLink, your work is worth more. Get started at farmlinksolutions.ca.